right, I think the time has arrived to begin our city council meeting. So we'd like to welcome everyone who's participating in this meeting. This is the city council study session for Thursday, March 26th. I see that all of our council is present. I've now got my split screen figured out, so I think I'm going to be able to see everyone during the presentations and hopefully be able to help everybody have the opportunity to participate as much as they'd like to. The first item on our agenda is to hear a presentation and discuss the impacts of the COVID-19 on city essential and non-essential operations. Mr. Brady.
So this is going to be fairly brief. We've sent out a couple of different briefings on what's taking place in the city, but I just want to kind of bring you up to speed on some of the significant changes we've made as far as how we provide services throughout the city. First and foremost, and I think I mentioned this on Tuesday, we have been able to move over 1,000 of our employees into working remotely. That's been a great effort from our IT department in helping our employees to access their work and their files and be able to do that remotely. It's been pretty effective to be able to see that we can continue having a lot of gatherings and discussions remotely and try to keep the work of the city moving on as best as we can. So I appreciate the work that's taken place by our IT department and our departments who've been very creative in having to stand up this remote access. So what that means, Mayor and Council, that means a lot of the work related to, for example, building permits and plan reviews continue today. Today, if you were to walk over to that building, those doors are actually closed. There is nobody at the counters on the development services side, but either online or on the phone, somebody is available to assist someone who is submitting a permit, needing a plan review. We have call center activation continues today, but because we had moved a couple years ago to our electronic permitting system, permits, plans can all be submitted online, and then working with different staff members, those can be reviewed remotely. So we're very happy with that, and I'm glad to say at least through this last week, we are still seeing some good activity in the permitting side, on the development side. So that still continues, at least through this past week or this current week. We're still seeing some good activity as far as development services and permitting. I also want to mention that same building, we have our customer service area that processes and helps individuals with the utility accounts. It was fortuitous for us that literally almost the week that we began to shut down many of our facilities, we were able to stand up a kiosk in that lobby. In one day, in this past week, we had 277 customers that were able to use the kiosk as opposed to going up and interfacing with a city employee at a counter. We did have 10 individuals who ended up going to the counter, but if you've been through that area, you know that we have a glass shield for all the employees, and they've been given protective hand gloves and masks for their convenience, but we only had 10 in that one day. I do want to remind the council in that same area, we do have the Department of Revenue. So we share space. We've have that estate agency inside of embedded with us in that building. And they had 20 visitors that came through there. But again, just through technology and the kiosks, we've been able to really minimize the interaction between person to person. And I think that's helped our employees feel a little bit safer about the work they do. Let me just visit a little bit about what we're doing on the solid waste side. We often talk about essential services, and rightfully so, immediately think about public safety. But I can tell you that residents would know what an essential service was if we stopped picking up the garbage. And so the solid waste is a very essential service, and we've tried very hard to keep that up and running. But remembering there are many shifts and vehicles. A single vehicle can be used by multiple individuals during a week. And so there's a very great concern about sanitizing those, and you can imagine the inside the cabs of some of those trucks. So we're taking extra precaution to make sure those employees are protected. As such, though, we found that it's prudent at this time to reduce the amount of times that the number of routes, we've tried to reduce those routes to reduce the exposure and to help reduce our cost. As such now, as you'll see, our pickups, when they come through, the green and the blue barrels will be deposited in the same truck that picks up the regular garbage, at least for now. That's saving us we've reduced our routes by a third, and that's helping us to minimize our cost. And so we'll continue that at least till we get through the worst parts of this pandemic, and then we'll reevaluate the opportunity to go back and do additional routes, separate routes, so we can sort out the green and the blue barrels from the black barrels that go to the landfill. Also, we've had to, in order to maintain the manpower we need to keep our solid waste trucks up and running, and also to minimize, again, interaction between the public and city staff. We currently have closed down our household hazardous waste facility. There's a lot of close interaction with individuals in that setting, and so in order to protect our employees, we've had to close that down for now. We'll bring that up as soon as we feel like it's safe again for our employees. And then one more item that I'll bring up today. I just got this morning from Carrie. So there, as you know, Mayor and Council, one of the concerns on the public safety side, on the police and fire side, is cleaning supplies. It's in short supply across the country. We're no different. And so we've had to try to come up with creative ways to come up with cleaning supplies that can meet the needs of our public safety personnel. And so an idea came out of a briefing, a regional briefing, that, you know, our water treatment plants have lots of bleach and bleached water. So I'm glad to report that today our Water Resources Department will be providing a significant amount of bleached water that will be used by public safety. So they don't have to worry about running out or worrying about buying something out of the stores. We have an ample amount of bleach supplies and materials at our water treatment plants, and so we'll be providing that resource to our public safety so that they can have that in great abundance, we think, for the foreseeable future. So those are just some of the items I wanted to bring up to council. I don't know if there's anything specific the council is interested in regarding our services that maybe I can try to answer today. We did send out a memo yesterday, I believe, from Natalie regarding nonprofits. We'll bring that briefing to you on Tuesday, but we wanted to at least share with you some of the information. We're having discussions with our nonprofits and being able to provide some additional services, enhanced services, especially those whether they fall in the categories of homeless and elderly. So you saw that memo, and we'll be ready to present more details to you on that, and now how it relates to the changes we're seeing from the federal government and how we can use federal dollars moving forward. We'll be able to give an update on that on Tuesday. So Mayor, that's just brief summary on that. I don't know if there's any questions or discussions on.
Okay, I'm going to guess there are a few. Council, questions regarding this agenda item? Okay, let's go with Jeremy and then Kevin.
Hey, Chris. I know that I've been reading in the news that there's been a few different beer breweries that have actually been able to turn into distilleries to create hand sanitizer or something to that effect. I know that we have a few downtown, and I'm sure their businesses are impacted by what's going on right now. Is that a path that we've explored, or can you touch on that at all?
That's news to me. We can certainly ask if that would help them. Like, I think that's what you're suggesting. If there's some way that they could provide something to our resource that we could pay for, we can see if they're interested. But I don't know that that's happened yet, but we can explore that.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just, when you started talking about the bleach and stuff,
Sure.
I think it was like one of the breweries had provided it over in Tempe or something.
Okay.
So
Okay.
just if we could look into it, I think that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Chris, when we talk about essential and non-essential personnel, looking at public safety specifically, what positions are we considering non-essential versus essential?
Well, most of the time when we talk about essential versus non-essential, we don't spend a lot of time trying to sort that out inside of the police and fire departments. We may get to that most of the time when we, in our terminology, at least for right now, when we think about non-essential, it'll be a lot of the more, and I hate to say this because I feel like they're essential, but I guess from a technical standpoint, they're not, from a definition as far as emergency operations. So that would be typically your more public services like parks and recreation, libraries, museums, art facilities. Those are the kinds of things that generally get described as non-essential.
Right, but what I'm asking, Chris, is within public safety, what are considered essential and non-essential? I mean, sworn versus non-sworn.
Right. Well,
Is that how we look at
No.
essential versus non-essential?
We haven't
Because I
really-
know because I think, like, for example, I was reading in the Capital Times update this morning that the state healthcare, whatever, said that she's expecting a ramp up in COVID cases in April and saturation of hospitals by May. And so just looking at that, for example, how will that impact dispatch? And is dispatch considered essential or non-essential to the mission of public safety?
Yeah, I don't know that there's very few positions, they would be more support positions than public safety that we may consider non-essential, but they're very few. I mean, we have to have dispatch. I mean, frankly, they're the front line. Nobody can go anywhere without dispatch. I don't know how to answer. I don't know that we've ever spent some time trying to separate that out unless it's an administrative position. But, we have a lot of administrative positions, not in public safety, but I always tell my payroll people they're probably the most essential personnel, because if they can't pay our employees, then nobody will come to work. So I don't know within those departments specifically that we spend a lot of time, unless it's maybe right now, if it's a community outreach educational program or something that doesn't necessarily lend itself to being able to respond directly to the emergency at hand. But a lot of those positions are now being repurposed to support the emergency. So maybe they might have been doing one other function that wasn't directly related to our emergency response, but now they will be. So, but those are things we're going to have to continue to look at as we go forward.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Jen?
Sorry about that. Yes, in response to Jeremy's question about the breweries, I did inquire with a brewery that we have in downtown yesterday, and I received a response that they're unable to make the sanitizer. To read the response, it says it requires 2 ingredients, 75% alcohol and a gel base like aloe to make a finished product. To achieve a 75% alcohol content takes distillation, boiling, and collecting the condensation until the alcohol is separated from the liquid mixture. Breweries do not use a boil, but no process, and have no process to collect the condensation. So unfortunately, it'll actually take a hard alcohol brewery in order to make the difference.
So if I could just touch on that, Jen, I was able to look it up. It was Oso Brewery. I don't know if it was their Gilbert location or one of their other locations, but Oso Brewery delivered 100 gallons of hand sanitizer to Banner hospitals, from what I'm reading. So, I don't know how they're doing it, but I think still an option worth exploring.
I can inquire with some other breweries.
Okay.
My
I'm sorry,
understanding
go
is
ahead.
it had to be a distillery, but you can research it more. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. I do have a few questions, Chris, about the presentation you just made. The kiosk, I think that is fortuitous that the kiosk came online, you know, at about the same time that we want to minimize human contact between our staff, our utility staff, and the public. Is that kiosk though located inside the building, and presumably are the doors unlocked so the folks can access that kiosk?
Yes, Mayor. Well, it's inside the, what do you call it? It's like the, if you've been over that building, the first set of doors, it's just inside those first set of doors,
Yeah.
but before you get into the main part of the building. I don't know what you want to call that.
Right.
Vestibule
Yeah,
area.
the alcove there.
Yeah, that's where it's at.
So,
Now, we often
so
will have a
those,
staff member at least directing people and encouraging them before, so they don't go all the way around and come into the other parts of the building through the secure side. We'll have someone out there just, you know, asking them to use the kiosk and help them, or at least show them what they need to do in order to engage with the kiosk. But they don't have to handle the cash or the credit card. They can just direct them to the kiosk. But because it's new and, you know, it's only been out there for a week or so, we do have a staff member to at least encourage people to use it. I know last Tuesday after our council meeting, when we were walking by that building, everybody was practicing safe social distancing, but there was 4 or 5 individuals waiting to use the kiosk. So I think, anyway, so that's how it's being used.
okay, great. So the Center Street building, the doors are unlocked. Folks can go in and access the kiosk in the foyer. If they feel like they need to have a interaction with an individual, they can still go to the walk-up counters, and the state revenue department is still open there as well. But those individuals are using masks and gloves. Is that my understanding?
That is correct. That's my understanding
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Your comments on I agree wholeheartedly on the solid waste emphasis. I mean, it seems like at our home, with people being home more often, we're producing more solid waste. So I think that with the shelter in place, you know, solid waste becomes all the more important. But I want to make sure I understood what you said about the Blue Barrel recycling program. Are we suspending that for the time being? Are we currently just taking everything from blue and green and black and taking it all to the landfill? Did
That's correct.
understand that correctly?
In order to minimize the number of routes that we have to run and to minimize the amount of different individuals using the same trucks, we've eliminated a third of our routes in order to protect our employees from having to be exposed. So we're doing it. That's what we're doing right now. We'll come out of that later, but that's the easiest way for us to minimize exposure for our employees right now.
Okay, well, that's unfortunate, but I don't disagree. I think so. On a short-term basis, we're suspending the Blue Barrel program, and people just need to understand that everything that's being picked up curbside is going to the landfill for now.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, and everyone should just continue to put their garbage out as they would. We don't want them to really change their practice of sorting, because we hope that we can get back to that at some point. So we're not trying to make too big a deal of it, other than just to know that right now, everything that's set out on the curb will go to the regular landfill. But at some point, we'll come back. And as council know, we've been having some discussions too. We're going to have to see where our providers are just on the recycling program in general, whether or not that's even a possibility, what the future of recycling is after all of this too. We don't know.
Yeah, understood. That discussion will be ongoing. But I think just for the sake of transparency and being honest with our customers, people ought to know, for the time being, our recycling program is suspended because of staffing concerns and financial pressures that the city's under right now.
That is correct.
The third point I wanted to ask about, this idea of us kind of producing our own cleaning supplies because of the heavy chemicals that we have access to for water treatment purposes. It sounds like those cleaning supplies are being used by public safety, which is great. I assume in jail facilities and vehicles, things like that. But I also know that yesterday I heard that we have shut down many of the restrooms in our parks, primarily just because of the need for doing intensive and frequent cleaning there. And we just can't, I guess we could, well, might there be some application for this to help reopen some of the restrooms or just facilitate more cleaning of restrooms and
Right.
park equipment?
So Mayor, two things are going on. Thank you for asking that. We haven't closed all the bathrooms down. We have closed most of them. Right now, the contractor that we have, as my understanding, the contractor that we have under contract to do the cleaning in the parks is very reluctant to continue to send their employees into those facilities without having the proper equipment. And the cost for that is now escalating significantly to provide any level of cleaning service in the bathrooms. In addition to that, we're also have initially, early on, before we closed it, we're experiencing tremendous amount of vandalism, where people were breaking into the bathrooms and taking out all the toilet paper. So effectively what was happening is we had bathrooms, but the people were going in there and damaging our bathrooms in order to acquire the toilet paper. And so then it didn't make sense to have the bathrooms open either. And we don't have the ability. We're concerned about just keep replenishing that when they're continuing to be stolen. And so we try to be strategic and try to keep some open around the city, but again, that's a big struggle. But yeah, we made that decision because frankly, it just became very unproductive for us and very costly. Again, our contractor is essentially making it financially not impossible, but very, very costly to keep those facilities open. And then our supplies are being stolen out of those bathrooms, even if they were to stay open, then they become unsanitary because there is no toilet paper or paper products inside of those. They're being taken from us.
Okay, so the homemade cleaning supplies aren't necessarily.
Yeah, it's not the clean.
That's going to help us.
That was certainly, and yes, that was certainly part of it, just to keep up with the cleaning. But those are some other factors that weighed into that conversation too, Mayor.
Okay, understood.
Mayor,
Kevin.
Oh, real quick, Kevin, I need to correct myself. Apparently, I misspoke. The kiosk is actually in a position, and it must be available, so it is available 24/7. So anybody can come and use the kiosk, and pay the utility bills at any time. So I just want to be clear on that.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Kevin, before we leave that point, so Chris, the kiosk is located outside of the building or
Yes.
it's
Apparently,
inside?
it must just be just outside that glass area. Maybe when I saw it, it looked like it was on the other side, but apparently it's in a position where you don't have to go into the locked area. It can be outside and be secured. So we have, what I was just told by Tim Meyer, that it is available 24/7.
Okay, is that the one and only kiosk we have for all of the utility
Right now,
departments?
yeah, we just received it. Certainly with this success, we may consider looking at another one, but right now, and this has been the area where people come anyway, most likely to come pay their utility bills anyway if they're not paying it. What we really encourage individuals to do is to sign up to do it online. You can do it so many different ways without ever having to come down, but we recognize some individuals, this is their best method or their only method. But right now, this is the location to pay it, yes, the only location.
Okay, and can you remind me, is there not another way to pay it? Do I recall that there's a way you can pay bills at Circle K stores?
No, I don't.
Am I imagining that?
No, because right now it's cheaper if they can just sign up with their account and do it online. As council knows, we rolled out a new application for that. And so we really encourage people to do it online. That really is the most secure and easiest way to do it. And we encourage them to take that option.
But if we've got people that are concerned about paying a utility bill, they can do that 24 hours a day at the Center Street location through the kiosk.
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Kevin.
Before we switch, Kevin, I'm not sure if you're switching topics. If we can, I have a couple questions on this.
Well, we can come back. Let's go to Kevin, and then Jeremy, feel free to ask whatever questions you'd like.
Chris, going back to the parks, I saw in the news earlier this week that I believe it was Surprise that closed their parks because people weren't heeding the social distancing and so forth. And not that I really want to go down that path at this point of closing parks. Would it at least make sense to close the park facilities, restrooms and such? And then looking at City Plaza, scaling back perhaps on the cleaning since most people aren't even there, and just saving money on our contract for cleaning our facilities.
Yeah, two good questions.
And that would really kind of go citywide, right? Because I think there's a lot, you know, if we have over 1,000 employees working from home, that means we have a lot of vacant offices at this point in time. So should we be scaling back on the cleaning and on the cleaning contracts and saving some money going that route?
Mayor, Councilor Thompson, that's a fair question. I think we'll evaluate it. I think it all depends on how long we think this is going to go on for, but certainly I will tell you it's hard, even after the cleaning crews have come through, it's hard to keep some of our employees from doing additional cleaning even after that. So right now the cleaning side of this is giving us an opportunity to do some deep cleaning when people aren't around. But your point is well taken, where there's not as much human activity in the building. And we've eliminated, as maybe the other part I should have mentioned in my briefing is also, we've asked that the public not come to City Hall, Municipal Plaza, unless they have an appointment. The doors will be closed and only secured and only allowed for city employees to come through. So if you come and you don't have an appointment, you'll be asked to go back, get a call, get an appointment. So you need to be have that appointment, and then you'll be escorted or accompanied by a city employee to come through other parts of the building. So that's where we are today. On the parks, it's an interesting discussion about parks, about whether we can close it down. I'm going to let Mr. Smith speak to that because the governor did come out with a declaration that there's some questions about whether cities now have the ability to actually close their parks.
Mayor and council, as you know, the governor came out with a declaration, I think it was only just a day ago, it feels like, and it limited the ability for municipalities to put in certain restrictions. Whether it applies to parks isn't clear, and the league has reached out to the governor. My reading of it, it doesn't preclude the city from closing parks, but the governor's office has taken the position that they've requested that cities not close parks. Now, whether that applies specifically to bathrooms, I don't think it's gotten down to that level of detail yet. So we're working with the league in those aspects. So as far as actually totally closing the park, which I don't think was Councilmember Thompson's question, was really more focused on the bathrooms. I don't think we've gotten direction that the bathrooms can't close, but I'll have to circle back on that.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy.
Yeah, my question is in regards to the park as well. I actually have another comment in regards to the bathroom. But these playgrounds that all of these kids are interacting on and touching are like giant petri dishes. So I'm not suggesting we shut the parks down where people can socially distance themselves, you know, at 6 feet apart. But, you know, I think to leave our playgrounds open, I don't know how the rest of council feels, but that would seem to me that would definitely help flatten the curve and stop the spread of this thing. So, you know, the fact that those are still open is a little mind-boggling to me.
So, Mayor and Council, we've actually posted their signage at all our parks. I believe they're out now, warning individuals about the use of the playground equipment and encouraging them to be aware that they are not cleaned on a regular basis. And so if they want to wipe them down, and giving them some thoughts, ideas about use of that equipment. I will tell you, I mean, we could, that's currently seems to be the national practice right now, is just to let people be warned and let them make their own decisions. But there is signage that we approved earlier in this week, and I believe that we borrow from the national standards that are being used across the country. and we've put those up. I believe that if they're not up, they should be up fairly quickly in all the locations, all the park locations around the city, and we can send you out a copy of what that sign looks like.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I believe you had a question. Why don't you go ahead and ask it now? It may or may not be exactly on point, but we can figure out when the right time to respond to it is.
Okay, Mayor, I do have a question on the parks. I mean, as I drive my parks in my district, I see a lot of homelessness there. I don't see the families there. I see the urban camping, I see the dogs, I see those individuals utilizing the facilities of our parks that I have in my district. And obviously Pioneer Park is a big magnet. I wish the families were there to drive out or to replace the good with the bad, but they're not. So we need to be conscious about that component. That's all I'm saying on that. The second thing, Chris, I wanted to follow up on Natalie's letter, and you can respond to it now or later. On these emergency shelters and the quarantine space for the homeless, is this a temporary thing or is it going to become a permanent thing? Do we have any idea? Thanks.
Mayor, Councilman Freeman, really that will come down to decision of resources. We've identified some resources now that we can meet those obligations. Whether or not those resources will be available ongoing into the future will be a discussion we'll have to have with council. But because of some opportunities we had right now, we were able to reprogram some dollars. We're going to be discussing with council, again, like I said on Tuesday, more of the memo specifically, but also having a discussion about we're in that time to make discussions or make decisions regarding the next round of CDBG. And I think also the possibility that we'll be receiving additional funding from the federal government. So we can discuss how the council would like to see those dollars used. But typically, most of the dollars used in CDBG have been directed towards elderly, the homeless. They have to still meet the criteria of the low-income need. We've been asked several times by the county to assist in helping find these types of shelters and locations for the homeless that may be affected by this disease also. And so working with Mesa United Way, New Leaf, and all their other nonprofits, Natalie's been spending a lot of time trying to come up with ideas where we can do immediate services, not something that's going to take a while. And I think she'll report on the fact that the cap we right now have is 15% for public service, and everything else is typically for a capital type program, which makes it very difficult to spend money quickly. But I believe that cap is being loosened, and she can talk more about that on Tuesday, which will give us the opportunity to provide more direct services quickly. And so that's why, in order to address some of the concerns we have about the homeless in our community, in the parks, we want to make sure we have enough beds and shelters that we can direct them to. And many of them are also recognizing that and working with them that they will provide shelters that provide isolation. So if there's a concern that an individual may have the virus, that they have the ability to put them in units or to be isolated from others so that we can try to maintain that self-quarantine. So that's a very broad kind of how we're addressing this right now.
Thanks. I'll just stay tuned for further. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. We talked on Tuesday about the fact that the state legislature has already allocated over $100 million in COVID-19 response. Half of that has gone to the governor's office, and the governor has discretion over $50 million to be used on social service type response, including homelessness. Also, I think we all got Mr. Butler's email yesterday that the $2 trillion federal aid package has made its way through Congress. So I think next Tuesday's meeting, hopefully by then, some of the dust will have settled and Natalie can update us on potentially some state and federal funds that might be available for that topic. Jen. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Brady. Do you want to comment on that? And after that, Jen?
No, I think Jim had something to say.
Mayor, I just got some clarification on Councilmember Thompson's question. Actually, the governor's office was fine with closing bathrooms. They didn't get down to the specificity on playground equipment yet. So that's the level of detail they've gone to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Jen?
Yes, did we get a clarification whether Mesa applied for the COVID-19 relief fund for the locality populations over 500,000? Butler was looking into that.
Yeah, I think he's going to be presenting a little bit later this morning, and we can ask him that question. I don't know if
Okay,
that's
thank
been
you.
decided yet, but we can ask him that question. He's presenting later this morning.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any. Okay, Jeremy, go ahead.
I got one other comment on the bathrooms. You know, obviously, the secondary effect of not having bathrooms open is that our homeless population won't have anywhere to go to the bathroom. What are we suggesting that we do about that?
Yeah, and that's why we've kept some of the larger park bathrooms open for that very purpose.
Okay. And I just want to reiterate again, I hope that we'll reconsider closing the playgrounds because I think we're doing an injustice to ourselves by leaving those things open.
Okay, thank you, Council. Any other comments on this agenda item? All right, thank you. The next item, item 1B, is to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on the impact of COVID-19 on the city's financial position and the city's budget forecast. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to let Candace kick it off, and then I'll have some comments at the conclusion of her presentation.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. We're going to kind of quickly go through what we're currently working on. Just kind of remind everybody the prior city planning that we've done here in the city of Mesa. So in our forecast that we've brought to the council previously, we had a 2021 economic correction or recession, and we first started talking to the council back in the 17-18 budget process. So this portion of it is really not new to us. The impact was included in the spring 2019, so last spring when we brought the forecast to you. We did include an economic correction, and we did include it in the 2021 fiscal year. We based it on the experience that Mesa has had with previous recessions, not the Great Recession, but kind of the standard recessions before that. We also have a general fund balance that's been greater than what our city financial policies call for. Our 18-19 ending fund balance was $90.5 million, which was 19.3% of the fiscal year 19-20 adopted budget. Our financial policies call for us to keep an 8 to 10% as a minimum fund balance. So when we ended our 18-19, we were up at the 19%. Also, in fiscal year 19-20 this year, we also have set aside, at this point, we'll have set aside $7 million over the last few years to be put toward that economic correction to kind of help us through that. So these are just some of the things that the city has done prior to this experience. Based on the COVID-19 and what we're looking at right now, what have we done so far? So right now, the actions that we have taken already is we have put a hold on all new ongoing operational expenses. We've also put a hold on any recruiting activities for vacant positions that are not related to a non-critical or a non-essential services. So as we discussed earlier, anything that's considered an essential service, those are going through the city manager's office for release of those positions. But if it's a non-essential service, at this point, all recruitment is on hold. We are also putting a hold on all capital projects that are not currently obligated, and our staff is going through all of those projects right now to get a list of those. Councilmember Thompson.
Chris, I do have a question on that bullet. On putting a hold on capital projects and reducing putting a hold on adding new and ongoing operational expenses. I'm assuming that that's going to impact the new station in Councilmember Luna's area, since that is a capital project that's not necessarily been obligated at this time because we haven't submitted or done much work as far as the bond goes. So we have these recruits that are going to be coming out of the academy and going through FTO, and we're not going to have necessarily a station to put them at. And Red Mountain and Superstition are both already at capacity as far as space for additional patrol officers. So is there any thought, or is Chief Cost looking at, you know, an outside the box thinking, whether they bring those construction type trailers on property somewhere, you know, because the officers are still going to have a place to do their reports and so forth. And also, how is this going to impact the station at East Marks? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman Thompson. So we've looked at all of those. You're correct. One of the projects that we may, and I think would be more of a delay in timing, might be the public safety complex. Because it really, I can't remember exactly where it is in the budget completion. It's either 2 or 3 years out from where we are today, something like that. We still have some time to evaluate that, but so from a capital side, it doesn't necessarily have a significant impact right now in our budget and what we're doing in the forecast. The staffing up, we have not, because we are ramping up, as you know. I think this year we're trying to do 3 police academies, which is very, very aggressive. We have not at this point done anything to slow that down. Our intention is to try to continue to move forward with that. I guess, Mayor and Council, the best, as Candace presents this to you, here's the thought we're trying to figure out. And if someone can help me figure this out, we'll be all in a better place. And that's why you're going to see us present scenarios. What we don't know, there's 2 things that are facing us. There's both the social impact of COVID, meaning how allowing people to come together, whether it's a park or museum or a library or parks facility. So from that perspective, we don't know when the time will come that we can even open those up again and make it available to the general public from a social standpoint. After that happens, once we are able to do that, the ongoing impact, and what we don't know is how long beyond that time will be the financial impact. How long will that continue? Obviously, it's happening right now and will continue as long as we have these restrictions on the social impacts of COVID, but certainly it will continue beyond that time when we're all back gathering together, whenever that is, whether that's 6 months from now, 9 months from now, or a year from now. Then we have to anticipate that there's going to be some period of time for the economy to recover, and how long is that going to take? So as we're going through these scenarios, someone may go, well, we can't, this will be resolved in 6 months, the COVID issue. People can go back to normal life. But the reality is we're going to be dealing with the huge impact that started back in March, middle of this month, all the way through to that point. And then the question is, how fast will it recover? So we believe, we have an assumption that at some point, this is going to end. The COVID will be, there'll be a solution, whether it's immunizations or vaccines or treatments or whatever. We're confident in that. We don't know when that's going to happen, but beyond that is how long is the financial impact? And so our purpose today is to present to you some scenarios and begin the discussion about where the sooner we respond to both on the financial side, we've already responded on the social side, but the sooner we respond on the financial side, that gives us a longer lead and avoids the impact down the road. If we wait to make decisions, then we have to make bigger cuts, and they may be for a prolonged period of time. But the difficulty is trying to figure out when do we think we're going to get back to some level of normalcy, even if it's just a mild recession type condition, and that's what we're struggling with. So decisions that are 2 or 3 years out, like a public safety facility, right now we're not, it's more going to be more of a delay, because what we're going to do, we'll bring it to you probably next week, because we're just going through the list today. The projects that we're scheduled to start being under construction or going out for bid or further design, those are the projects that are scheduled in this year's or this year and next year's budget, those are the ones that are getting the most critical evaluation, because if we can push those out, if we can save the capital dollars, even though they're one-time dollars, and push them out farther into the future, that buys us the resources, it frees up the resources that we might need to make it through these difficult times and absorb the impact on the financial side. So right now, I'd say projects like this, the public safety complex, is more of a capital issue, especially on public safety. It may get delayed. As far as the personnel, right now, we haven't heard from police that they wouldn't have enough places to put them, but we'll keep having that discussion. On the fire side, we're still planning the Eastmark project is still moving forward because we have obligations there. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Thank you, Chris. I'm guessing my poor Monterey Park will probably never be built.
Our Monterey Park, yes.
Okay, thank you. Candace, please proceed.
All right. So Mayor and Council, so again, exactly like Mr. Brady said, this is just where we pause. We kind of pause. That's what these are. That's why we're calling them holds. This is holding on any activities that may obligate us to future expenses, and we just don't want to move forward on those at this time until we can further evaluate. So it doesn't mean any of these are eliminated. They could be delayed or could just be put on pause for right now, and then we'll pick them back up when we're sure that we can afford the operational expense of those. Right now, we're doing our financial impact analysis is underway. The briefing this morning is really about to tell you what we're doing, what our process is, what we're going through. We will be coming back to you next Thursday to actually walk through some numbers with you as we look at the different scenarios of revenues, and then also what our expense packages could look like in order to meet those revenues. So today, we're not going to talk about numbers specific, but we're going to talk about our process.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Thompson has a question.
I do. On that, Candace, would it be wise if we were to do the 3 different scenarios with the initiative cap and with the ordinance cap, and then as a normal budget without the caps?
Oh, okay. So,
We're talking about the transfer from the enterprise fund to the general fund?
Okay.
That just passed, yeah. So we just passed that. So all of our scenarios right now would be with that, since that ordinance did pass, all of our scenarios would keep that at a percentage of gross revenues of the enterprise fund.
So that's in the assumption as the ordinance. Was there something else you were asking?
Well, should we also do one based on the initiative that's out there right now as well?
We could.
Oh.
I'll tell you, Mayor and Council, if we did that, we stopped recruiting police and firemen right now. I mean, those are kind of decisions. If that has to be an assumption, it shuts down all new recruitments for police and fire, and we're in a reduction. I mean, we calculated it, right? Some $40 to $50 million on top of what this recession, this COVID impact will be. It's not sustainable without having a tremendous impact on across the board, citywide, but certainly public safety, where the majority of our resources are, would have to have a tremendous impact. We'd have to begin immediately notifying cadets that they no longer have, because there's such a lead time, absorbing those costs would be tremendous. So we could do that. I'm afraid of having those conversations in a public manner, because I think it would create tremendous, we could at least show you a general oversight of what that would mean and how much that would affect. Probably not bringing back a lot of services that are closed today for years, and then the impact it would have on public safety in the immediate term.
Good, thank you. David.
I was wondering if, Chris, you might want to remind us during the Great Recession, was 2008, 2012, 2010. Didn't the city have a shortfall of $60 million? And can you maybe just remind us how many employees were laid off as a result of that? And with this other proposed initiative that's floating, we're looking at a $15 million shortfall on our funds. So if you could maybe later on discuss how many people will be affected by pushing this kind of shortfall in our budget.
Yeah, we can do that. Your number is very close to, I think, what the impact was. And frankly, it was not only the 300 to 400 employees that we had to lay off, but what we did in addition to that is what we did on police and fire is we stopped hiring. And so while we didn't lay off any police and fire, when there was a retirement or someone left the city, we didn't fill those positions for quite a while. And so their numbers reduced significantly. So it wasn't a layoff, but we left several positions unfilled in public safety. And then that's when you started seeing the number of patrol officers on the street dropped off. And so we could kind of look at a scenario what that would look like going forward on top of our anticipated impacts of COVID.
Jeremy.
Yeah, so this isn't, this initiative is not going to matter, right? I mean, the economy is naturally going to decrease sales tax. It's naturally going to decrease our utilities. So to somehow suggest that the initiative is based on percentages. So what we're going to see right now is going to happen organically. This is the problem of why we shouldn't have been drawing down our reserves in the first place. Our reserves for our utilities run out in what, 4 years? So now with this economic impact, that's my question. When do our utility funds, when do those reserves run out?
So Mayor and Council, I absolutely disagree with that statement. We have healthy reserves. And if you look at our history, not necessarily looking forward, it is significant. The initiative will have a significant impact. It'll be on top of the impacts of COVID. It won't be, and one of the things that maybe you're not aware of is during the recession, actually our utilities did very well. People, even during the worst of times, during foreclosures and bankruptcies, or not bankruptcies, foreclosures in homes, our utilities were actually what carried us through. And that's why Mr. Thompson often refers to the idea that restricting the transfer is not of a good, hasn't helped. In the past, it's been the way the city has maintained itself through these difficult times. And that was exactly what happened during the recession, is the city was able to say, well, look we took a devastating hit on our sales tax and our permits. And so we went to the utility fund because it was doing very well. And we didn't have a drop off. And I suspect right now, if I were to go run the numbers as far as the utilization of our utilities, probably as strong as it's ever been right now. And we've had a wet year, so we're seeing a little bit of drop off, but with everybody staying at home, my sense is that the utilities will still be doing very well.
And what about our sales tax?
Well, I haven't seen the sales tax numbers yet, but as through January, was that the last number? We were 7.5% ahead. So we know we're going to lose a lot of that. But again, during difficult times, the utilities have been the strongest financial pillar that we've always had, the most steady and consistent of all.
Well, that's great. Then, you know what I think we should do? I mean, we just saw an unemployment number this morning. 3 million people in the United States filed for unemployment. So, you know, if we have so much money in our reserves for our utilities, then we should immediately offer reprieve to the people who are out of work, right? I mean, we've raised their utility rate significantly to where we have the highest water rates in the entire East Valley right now. Maybe it's time to give people a break on their utilities.
Jeremy, give us a break on the campaigning for the initiative, okay? I think this is very quickly going to turn into a situation where we're going to have to call on those folks who are proposing this initiative to be responsible and to recognize that we're in a financial crisis. And the idea for floating a stupid idea, at the time for floating a stupid idea is just not now. So
I didn't bring up the initiative. I'm just defending the fact that the initiative saves our utilities. That's the problem. Yeah. I didn't start.
I think we're off the topic of this agenda item, and we are delving into politics. So, thank you. I think the question has been raised: that do we need to address the impact, the potential impact of the initiative on our financial crisis? I think going forward, the answer is yes. So please proceed, Candace.
Thank you. So Mayor and Council, as we go on, again, we'll be coming back to you next Thursday to actually talk about the numbers and the numbers that are related to the scenarios. But what we do want to not lose sight of the fact is that it is almost April, and we do have a requirement to adopt a budget this spring, even though we are in the middle of the COVID-19 and not sure exactly when we'll come out of it. So what we want to do is let you know what our process is and how we're going to go about making sure that we're meeting all of our statutory requirements with the state, and while we're doing these financial scenarios at the same time. So we'll be really doing two parallel processes. We'll be coming to you to adopt a budget for fiscal year 2021 that's consistent with our operations as we are today. Meaning there will be no salary step increase. That will be, usually each year we recommend a salary step increase for our employees. We will not be recommending that, as that is new ongoing expenses. So we'll be coming to you with a budget, basically how we're operating today. We'll be bringing that to you for adoption. At the same time, we'll be working on modification or reduction scenarios, and we'll come back and modify the fiscal year 2021 budget after adoption. So we'll be asking you to adopt a budget so that we can move forward and make sure we don't miss those timetables. And we also don't want to hurry our reduction scenarios or what exactly it is we want to do or how we're going to implement. So in order to not to rush through and make rush decisions, we're going to go ahead and adopt as is today and then come back and modify.
So Mayor and Council, what that means is good news, bad news. Good news, we just don't think it's worth a lot of time trying to come up with a proposed budget for next year we don't know what next year's going to look like. So we're going to essentially take this year's budget, move it forward, but by the time, while we're doing that, really making adjustments downward until we can figure out where we need to be as far as reducing our budget. But we don't see us needing to spend a lot of time with council doing budget presentations like we've done in the past, because we don't know what that budget's going to look like. And just planning on approving a budget, essentially almost like continuation budget from this year, and giving ourselves the flexibility that once we come out of this in a recovery, then maybe we can come back, I don't know, mid-year and have a discussion with council if we're having recovery, that if we need to add, if we're looking at adding additional programs or projects, then we can come back to council and include and add those to the budget in sometime next year.
So now we get into really what we're going to be looking at and what we'll be coming back to you next week with. So when we're looking at the actual impact of the COVID-19 on the city of Mesa, again, we did anticipate an economic correction. The difference is that it came a little earlier than we had anticipated, and it's obviously going to be deeper than we had anticipated. And so we're looking at how deep and trying to measure that right now. Also, our recovery is difficult to predict right now because since we are in the middle of it. So until we start the turnaround and start to see the end, then we'll be able to start to judge how fast we think we'll come out of the recovery. The other thing that was not included in our forecast was just the preemptive closing of some of our public facilities. What that's going to do is kind of skew the impact of these reductions or modifications towards those facilities, meaning those departments. And so there'll be 3 departments that we'll hit. We'll be doing some severe modifications to in order to, based on those facility closures. Again, we'll be coming back to you with that. But that's basically the impact of what we're working on right now due to the COVID-19. Again, we had an economic correction in our forecast. It's just that it is sooner and deeper than in our original anticipation. We're looking at 3 scenarios, and Mr. Brady mentioned them a little bit earlier, is really we're looking at how long will this last? Is this a 6-month endeavor? Is it 9 months? Or are we looking at really a full year? And what's the impact to our facilities and to the city overall? In our first scenario, which is 6 months, it puts it about October 1st, would be about a 6-month scenario. This is the list of facilities, and I may not have hit all of them, but these are the main ones within the city that are currently closed to public. And to staff as well. So these are currently shut down. We have at this point decided that the 2020 summer seasonal programming will not go forward. So at this point, we are calling the cancellation of any summer programs that were previously scheduled in other years. Those would be things like aquatics, the recreational programs, and our contemporary arts classes over at the Mesa Arts Center. During this time, we're going to look at these closed facilities to see if there's any expenses that we can forego because they are closed. For example, in the summer programming, now that we're not doing the summer programming, there are expenses that went along with those programs, and so we'll be evaluating what that net savings to the city will be. That will allow us to roll that into kind of that one-time savings of helping us get through this recession. So we will not be filling seasonal positions, and we'll look at our year-round positions in those facilities to see which positions we really need to keep in order to ramp back up later, and which ones we will need to forego at this time. We'll also be looking at all the other cities, city departments, besides just the three that are impacted, to see what reductions we can do to get through this time period. When we move into the 9-month scenario, that's when we start to affect our winter season of our performing live at the Mesa Arts Center, as well as the Convention Center and the amphitheater. We are getting into seasons at this point, and so if we are going to 9 months, it would be about January 1st. So we're looking at those scenarios. What if we are not able to open those facilities until midway through their winter season? What does that do? Can they recover any portion of their season through the spring? Or is the lead time for their shows just too great that really halfway through the year really takes their whole season? So we'll be talking with the departments and evaluating what that would look like, what that staffing plan would look like. If we're looking at a 9-month scenario, we are looking at any facility that's currently closed going to a minimal staffing or a skeleton crew to make sure that we keep those folks that we need in order to ramp back up when we are able to open those facilities. We'll also be looking at the other departments, non-mission critical services that departments have, and where can we have reductions or discontinuation of some programs. If we are actually looking at a whole year from now, and we are needing to continue to keep these facilities closed even longer than we anticipated, at that point, we would basically call the winter season for those 3 facilities because they would not be able to recover anything for that season. At that point, we'd also be looking at spring training. Now, right now, we're optimistic that spring training for 2021 will go as planned. So we're optimistic on that because it is a whole year away. But we're going to keep watching and to see what's going on in other cities and other states and when they're starting to open up large groups of people and crowds of people. So we'll keep a watch on that. What that does, it doesn't really affect our staffing as much as it affects our revenue estimates on whether or not we get that second Christmas in 2021. So we'll look at that. We'll have a scenario where we assume spring training 2021 will go forward. We'll also have a scenario where we assume that it does not go forward, just because that is a difference in revenues for that spring. Okay. And we'll be looking at all of those. Remember, some of these performing live and amphitheater and convention center, again, they do have long lead times. Some of these shows are booked maybe booked a year or so ahead. And so really, whenever we can open those up, that's when we can really start to book those shows. So we need to look at that lead time on them coming up. So that's really the 3 that we're looking at. We're going to be working with departments on all 3 of those. And as this rolls out, we'll look at what we think is the more likely scenario. Is it 6? Is it 9? Is it 12? Is it some combination thereof? So where do we go from here? What's our recommendation? Right now, our recommendation is to go forward and adopt, like we said, the 2021 budget with no modifications. Just really, as we're operating today, we'll go ahead and adopt that. That takes the pressure off of us doing that. We're looking to adopt that in May, so coming to you with the tentative budget adoption and then the final budget adoption both in the month of May. Get those out and out of our way, and at that point, we can still focus on the modifications that we'll need to make. We're also recommending that we implement our 6-month scenario. I believe at this point, that's a realistic scenario to look for that October 1st date. That again is the discontinuation or cancellation of summer programming that would normally happen and the costs that are associated with that, as well as the staffing that's associated with that. And we're also going to evaluate those non-critical services for delay and or reduction. Similar to the capital projects, do we delay them so that our operations and maintenance doesn't come on as soon, gives us one-time savings, those type of things. And again, we'll be back to you next Thursday with the actual numbers of those scenarios. What do we think it looks like on the revenue side? Again, things to think of, we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier here, is that there's 2 things that we want to look at. One, how deep is the recession going to go? And that's really going to depend on how long we have to stay at home, how long our restaurants and bars and facilities close down. That's going to give us our depth. At that point, we need to figure out what is the rate of recovery? How fast are we going to recover from this? And I think that really is going to be a factor of how long it takes in the first place, how long the recovery will be. So we're working on those scenarios, staff is, and we'll bring those back to you next week so you can kind of get the magnitude of what we're looking at, and that'll help to frame our conversations around departments and the modifications that we need to make.
So, Mayor and Council, I thank Candace for the presentation, putting this together. So, no decision has been made right now. We want to do this working with council, but we wanted to kind of have you see what we're working on in the different scenarios so that when we come back next week, we can kind of understand kind of the how we're trying to frame the conversation and the decision-making process. But you did see, and this is, I know, very painful, and it's not anything we want to do, but we are at a minimum recommending the council give serious consideration to making decision fairly quickly that at least from now through the next 6 months till October 1, that the facilities and programs that are currently closed and all the summer programming that we're looking at coming into during this next few months, that all those be suspended. And that's not an easy thing to do because we understand how important they are in the community, but we're still struggling with the concept is when will social gathering be allowed back? I mean, realistic, when would we be able to have another show at the amphitheater or at the MAC? And how soon would we really be able to open up the pools and having families and children come into that kind of a location? We don't see that where that is going to happen anytime soon. And even if it happened in the middle of the summer, there's no way we could ramp up for the personnel that we would need to support that. Decisions are being made right now. Training is taking place right now for aquatics programs and for our summer programs. And before we continue to make more and more commitments to these individuals and these expectations of having some kind of job or employment with the city, we just feel it's not reasonable for us to bring them on and then for the next, why we wait for the next 2 to 3 months, not have them providing any service, yet we're having to pay for services that are not being rendered. Doesn't seem like a wise use of our funds. We understand the pressure it puts on families with opportunities, things to do, but it just doesn't, that's a very difficult position. And first and foremost for me as the city manager, it's very difficult for me to contemplate how I can protect city employees during this time as they are responsible for engaging the public in all these facilities, again, aquatics or recreation centers or museums or art centers. As much as we would love to open our doors, the risk to our employees is undetermined, but it is high. And that guides a lot of the decisions you see in front of us. And then, of course, the unknown is the financial impact regardless. Even if we were to be able to get back sometime the end of May, the financial impact that we've suffered since mid-March would almost require us to begin making these kind of decisions, if nothing else, just on a resource issue. So no decisions yet. We're working with departments beginning today and through next week, and we want to come back next Thursday and give you some more details and specifics and maybe start putting some numbers and positions and ideas about what we would do. There's a lot of anxiety out there, obviously, and we understand it, but we want to make sure we get the best information out there. But we wanted to have this conversation with you first today and then come back in a week and provide some more specific details. Thank you.
Thank you. I know the council's going to have some good questions for you on this. Just this is a sad scenario that we're talking about. The quality of life in our community is really tied to the things we're talking about. Shutting down the MAC, shutting down museums, shutting down the aquatic program. I mean, that's going to have a dramatic negative impact in our community. But I understand that it may be absolutely necessary. So, Chris, those programs obviously generate some revenue, probably not, they're not self-sustaining. But I imagine when we're making, and as you mentioned, there's two facets to this decision. There's the social and health prohibition, that it just might be absolutely ridiculous to think that if we're in a desperate medical situation, that we're going to encourage people to congregate together. So it might be a no-brainer just on that point a month or two from now. But as we talk about this next week, I would be curious to know on the financial side, how significant a savings is it when a lot of these programs are actually generating some revenue, there's some cost recovery involved in it. Is it necessary financially, or is the savings really not that significant because they do generate some revenue?
Yeah, Mayor, it's a great question. It's a net cost ultimately to the city. A lot of times the revenues to help offset some of the cost, but they do not cover they're not an overall net income to the city. There is still a tremendous amount of cost from the general fund. Obviously, those revenues do help us in being able to provide them, because then we don't have to direct as much of our general fund resources to cover those net differences, losses. So at the end of the day, reducing these programs, while there is an income, at the end of the day, there is a expense to the city, and there will be savings to the city.
Sure. Yeah. I understand that these programs are not self-sustaining. I'm just saying that next week when we're talking about this, I think would help put it into financial context if we knew how much of a subsidy is associated with each of these programs.
We'll calculate both the revenue loss as well as the expense savings. So.
Yes, and
Okay.
as we're looking at these, you're correct. They do have revenues that offset their operations. So, example, the museums do have revenues that offset their operations. Unfortunately, right now, we'll have to take that into consideration with the facility closed. We still have the operations of the staff and everything, and we don't have those revenues anymore. So they're actually, while they were not, the revenues were offsetting the expenses before, we now don't have those revenues. So the question is, for how long will we not have those revenues? And how long can we sustain those expenses?
Okay, thank you. I know we do have several council questions. Let's go with Jen and then David.
Regarding the arts, they are more sustainable than we think. If we ask them to operate within the bounds of the funding that they have without city assistance, would that be possible? A possible scenario, instead of cutting them all out until we can fund the gap that they need, can we ask that they reduce their function within the budget they have without needing assistance?
So Mayor, Councilmember Duff, we can certainly ask that question. I'll tell you, it's almost an impossible. It would be interesting to see what that would look like. Remember, the first part is the social gathering, health gathering, whether or not that's even going to be a viable option. And two, currently today, the city subsidizes, when we take the whole Mesa Arts Center, it's over $7 million.
$7 million.
Out of a budget of 11 or 12? I don't know. Well, there's a $7 million general fund support. And so it would be a very limited capacity, and it would have to be a high value event or program that was going to be able to bring in enough income to support it. But if that's possible, that's great. There are very few venues across the country that can say that, but we can certainly look and see if that's a possibility.
Wait a minute. The other comment, and I don't want to go deep into it, is that we're asked to make some kind of, and I know we'll discuss this more next week, but some kind of guess or assumption of whether we want to do a 6-month, 9-month, or 12-month. But I don't think we can really get into that until we talk about our political decisions as far as, are we going to instill a shelter in place? I know we're waiting on the governor, but we do have the option of taking some of these measures in ourselves. So the more aggressive measures that we make as a city allows us to better predict when we're going to be able to get somewhat back to normal? Do we take the Band-Aid off very slow and then, have to sustain a longer loss? Or do we want to take harsh measures up front and be able to predict that loss is going to be greater up front, and then being able to come back much quicker in the later months? So I just want to make that a comment, because for me to even anticipate what might happen, I think is greatly dependent on our political decisions of how aggressively we want to address the virus.
Thank you, David. And then Mr. Thompson.
Yes, Chris, I had a question for you. Now, we are looking at a 6-month window. Would we be prudent to evaluate it within 3 months to see if the situation has changed relative to the COVID virus? Is that something we might look at so that we're not confined with the 6 month?
Yeah.
That's my first question.
Okay.
The other one is when we talk about the program at the Mesa Arts Center and our museums, is it possible that they may want to use technology and offer streaming availability to our communities so that we don't totally cut off the arts within our city of Mesa, but bring in some of these individuals that are quite knowledgeable, famous, do a really good job in performing, and provide streaming availability as an option for Mesa Arts Center as well as the museums within our city?
So thank you, Councilor Linda. So Mayor and Councilor Linda, I think to answer, let me try to answer your second question first. Certainly we can leave that as an option. At the end of the day, this is going to become here's a number that we're going to make an assumption on that we need to get to in our savings. And we're going to have to push everybody to get to that number. And if there's a way for them to help us achieve those certain savings and still provide those kinds of programs, that's great. But we're trying to, at the end of the day, it becomes an estimation that we have to make about how deep and how long this is going to last. And there, frankly, there's so many variables out there, it's very hard to guess. But that's why right now, my best guess and my recommendation today would be, if I had to give you a final recommendation and what it will be most likely next week, is that we have to make an assumption that nothing materially is going to change until October, whether it's the social and health gathering or whether it's the beginning to see a financial recovery. And so we're going to make an assumption there's a base assumption that we have to come up with at least a 6-month plan. Now, the 9-month and 12-month plans may be actually closer to our reality. The challenge with the way budgeting works, and with the fact that most of our costs are related to ongoing expenses related to personnel costs, that's 65% or so of our budget. The longer we wait to make those decisions, the more difficult it gets to make. We have to make more. If we are wrong and it's worse than we thought, then the only way to make up the difference is to cut more and to keep those positions vacant longer. And then that will cause us to go beyond the non-essential services, and we'll start having to have more discussions with the essential services and how they can begin to reduce, because that's where 75% of the budget, 70% of the budget is in the essential services, and we're trying to solve a problem on the backs of the non-essential services, which only has 30% or less of the total budget. And so that skews the impact, and it always has been when we're making these kinds of decisions. So even though, a 5% reduction in public safety is 3 or 4 times that, maybe more, on the non-essential side. And so we're trying to create a balance on all that. So I think the question we're going to have to answer at some point in the next week is, the sooner we can make a decision on which of these scenarios we're going to go with, and assuming the first one is a given, then the next question is, after that, whether it's January 1st or a year from now, is that what our planning horizon is? If we can make those adjustments sooner, then it gives us tremendous amount of flexibility out into the future, and we're not having to make it, hopefully not having to make as many more cuts later on. Now, if we're wrong and we're too aggressive, then we can always bring things back, right? That's the unfortunate part, and that's the painful part, is we may have to identify positions that, if we're looking at it in a 9 or 12-month cycle, we may have to make decisions on positions for staffing now, and have to get, because we have, remember, we're not just going to tell someone tomorrow, you no longer have a job and thanks for your work and see you. We try to be very generous and very helpful. We have severance packages, we have formulas in place for the number of years you've been here and how much, that impacts your severance pay. So even the lead time, if we made decisions today about reducing staffing, the financial impact or savings won't come for 3 or 4 months out into the future, just in time for it, because we're trying to be very respectful of our employees and considerate that this didn't happen because of anything they did. And so we want to try to help them transition and provide some resources for them. So that's our dilemma, is a 6-month program is pretty nominal as far as cost savings. The January 1 maybe give us something, but if we're wrong, we can always bring things back sooner. But it almost suggests we have to make these decisions sooner in order to have the most impact that has a real savings for the city in the long term.
Okay, Kevin.
Chris, could you talk through, and just an idea, when we're looking at our budget, could you talk through what it would look like if we took our essential functions, our essential departments, and we gave them a budget, and then looked at our non-essential departments and did a zero-based budget? Could you kind of talk through what that would look like, and if it would actually help us, or is that just creating more work?
Yeah, that creates a lot of
departments.
To do a zero-based budgeting right now it would take a tremendous amount of administrative effort to do that and sit down and go through all that. And frankly, those are the areas that are probably running the leanest of all of them, right? Because they get the fewest dollars in the general fund. There's not, and because they're the softer services, right? They're the parks, there's the recreation programming, that's the libraries, and the programming goes with libraries, and it's the arts and the museums. It's kind of that evaluation on a zero-based budgeting is always an interesting process when you're evaluating those kind of socially beneficial programs, those quality of life programs, and trying to figure out what's the right metrics to determine whether this is the right kind of programming for a community. That takes a lot of work and a preparation in establishing values. Right now, what we're focused on is, frankly, unfortunately, COVID has kind of guided us, that's not the right word, provided us, kind of like, listen, you can't, these programs are not going to be available, right, for the next 6 months. You can't have people coming and sitting next to each other at an event at the amphitheater. So that already is kind of telling us, already directing us in the areas where we're going to look for those savings first, is in those areas where we just don't anticipate from a social and health perspective that we're going to be able to have.
Okay, thank you. Other questions at this point? Please proceed, Candace.
Okay, I think
That was it, Mayor.
That's where we're at.
We'll come back next week with more details.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that we should really be changing our perspective. We just got the unemployment numbers this morning. 3 million Americans filed for unemployment. I'm just saying, I don't know that we should be worried about arts and other social programs. When 3 million people filed for unemployment, we should seriously be focusing on what kind of stimulus, or how are we going to help these people through hard times. I don't think a person that lost their job is really that concerned about if they're going to be able to go to the Mesa Arts Center. I am strongly suggesting that we hoard our cash and reserves and stop all discretionary spending so that we have enough cash to make it through this. And so I really hope that we're analyzing this. And then, there's other things in this presentation that I'm not seeing today, and perhaps they'll come up at a later time. But, one of the other things that we need to consider is that our pension programs like PSPRS and ASRS are, ASRS more specifically is heavily invested in equities. I think there's something like 70% of their money was in equities, and we just saw a 30% fall off in the stock market. So I think it would also be prudent to start reaching out to some of these other organizations and saying, well, what impact is that going to have on our budget next year if our unfunded liabilities for PSPRS and ASRS go through the roof? I mean, there's other major problems involved, and I just don't think we should be worried about the social programs. I mean, we're going to be social distancing for quite some time, and I think more importantly is flattening that curve.
Okay. Other comments, council? All right, the next item on our agenda is item 1C. That's to hear a presentation and discuss the use of state and federal funds to address the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Brady?
Yeah, there he is. Mr. Butler has joined us. Oh, now he made it, filled out the cubes there, Scott. Thank you. Nice and balanced.
Glad I can help. So, Chris, just wanted to clarify, would you like Natalie to go over the CDBG part first, since that's with existing funds, or how would you like us?
She's going to present hers next week. We're going to just go with what you have.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Great. Mayor, Council, good morning. As everyone's been anxious to hear more information about the federal legislation that passed and the state legislation that we talked about a little bit on Tuesday and referred to earlier. I'll preface all of this by saying there's a lot, we know a lot, but the details are still to come on the specificity of the program, the criteria. There's a lot of unanswered questions. And out of a 909-page Senate bill, the magnitude of programs, the magnitude of spending, but then on top of that, when you add in that so much of the rules and regulations are going to be governed by what the secretaries of each of the individual departments are putting in place as far as, I shouldn't say all the criteria, but there are many programs that defer to the departments themselves and federal agencies to institute their own rulemaking and own policies. We're going to be spending weeks sorting all this out, and hopefully the federal government will move as quickly as possible. And I know we can all scoff at the speed of the federal government, but I think they sense the urgency to try to get this money out the door as quickly as possible. I'm just going to touch on what we know as far as a few of the overriding programs today, but on top of that, I know there's a lot of questions that you all have, and rightfully so, about everything from SBA loans to private businesses to other social programs that are going to greatly impact our community, but fall outside of that direct city services. And so I think knowing that we're going to have a lot of time moving forward over the next few weeks for council to look at these different issues, we will try to work with as many different outside partners and others to get you that information. And I'll continue to share information as I get it, as it's changing by the hour, like most of this is. But let me just touch on a few programs. I'll be glad to answer then, of course, any questions I have, and I won't be shy to tell you that I just don't know yet, but that we'll know a lot more in the coming days. So a few things just to know, and this goes to what Councilmember Duff had asked earlier. As of right now, we believe that we are eligible for what's being called the Coronavirus Relief Fund. That's a $150 billion fund that the Senate created that's eligible for states, but also municipalities with a population greater than 500,000. We believe that they will use the 2018 census population estimates, which put us at 511,000 people as our population. So we should be eligible for that pot of money. And so we just want to see the criteria once it's put out by the agency before we can say that definitively. But certainly that would be a huge win for Mesa to be able, for lack of a better term, if we're able to tap into that funding. The exact amount of what we will get is still up in the air because there's, going back to that criteria, there's just questions about how, what kind of population numbers they'll use for the counties, whether they back out other eligible entities, like for example, in Arizona, will Maricopa County be able to count its full population, or would its population numbers be what it is minus the city of Phoenix and the city of Mesa as eligible subrecipients of this money as well? So that's some of the level of detail we don't know, and all those population numbers will impact. And then you put that magnitude out between all entities over 500,000 across the United States. Some of those decisions will impact what our number is. So it's very much a moving target right now, but obviously once we get some direction on that, that's something that council and Mr. Brady in the budget office will get just as soon as possible, because it will factor in to some of these discussions that you just had on the previous item. On top of that, additional money for CDBG, $5 billion was injected into the CDBG program. Once again, the complexity of that, $2 billion of those dollars, of the $5 million, will be put out as normal formula grants. Then the additional $1 billion would go to the states, and the states will have the discretion on how to spend that. The remaining $2 billion will be based on criteria set up by the federal agency itself, with the focus on areas that are hardest hit by the coronavirus. So those are criteria that we will continue to monitor, and obviously if it's something that the city can tap into, I know we'll be working aggressively to tap into those dollars. There's $4 billion in homeless assistance grants, 1.25 billion in Section 8 vouchers. We've got 1 billion in rental assistance, 50 million for Section 202 housing for the elderly, and I'm just running down the list just to give you a flavor of what all is in here. 1.5 billion to the EDA to help economic development projects in communities, so that continue to try to get the economy back on track. We've got burn justice grants, 850 million that go out by formula, that the city will be receiving portions of that. 100 million in firefighter grants. We're waiting to see the criteria for how that will be distributed, whether it's a formula as usual, or whether there's new criteria for that. Disaster relief grants. The Federal Transit Administration received $25 billion to go towards transit agencies across the country, and so certainly Valley Metro will be a recipient of that, and so we're waiting to see what that magnitude will be locally. We have $10 billion from the FTA that will go to commercial airports. Phoenix Mesa Gateway will definitely be a recipient of that, so we're waiting on final numbers. There's everything from 900 million into LIHEAP, a program to help low-income individuals pay utilities. There are childcare block grants, community service block grants. I mean, the list goes on and on. And again, these are just the programs that in some way or another touch city or city operations. There's emergency food assistance grants, dislocated worker grants. It is certainly a challenge to wrap our arms around these programs. It's the largest federal aid package in the history of our country, and we're going to continue to work through this. We're looking at every program. We have our federal assistance from our colleagues at Square Patton Boggs, who have tremendous resources that are looking into this as well. So we're going to continue to monitor every dime that's available on the federal side to see how we can bring that back into our local community. On the state side, we're also waiting for guidance from the governor's office about how the governor plans to allocate the $50 million that was referenced earlier. It does, the mandate from the legislature is that will be spent on social service programs. but how the governor decides to set that up, what the criteria is for nonprofits or local governments to tap into those funds, we just don't know yet. And on a call yesterday that the mayor participated on with the governor's office, they did not give us a timeline for those decision making. They just said they're working aggressively to try to come up with some numbers. So with that, after reading off a bunch of numbers, but not able to give you a lot of detail behind those at this time, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. David?
Hey, Scott, thank you for that briefing. I did get that briefing to the National League of Cities, and I appreciate what they're doing for us and advocating for cities, towns, and villages. Now, as I read through the information they sent out, I noticed that there was not support given to supporting cities for relief or reduction in force. Is that still there, or is that possibly going to be changing? Will the federal government support cities in providing some relief for employees that we need to lay off?
Mayor and Councilmember Luna, just looking through the information right here, I'm not aware of a fund, could be there, but as of right now, I'm not aware of a fund that's unique to government, and you may not have been referring to that. There is $650 million in a fund for it's called the Dislocated Worker National Reserve. And yeah, I'm just looking at the notes on this. I'm sorry, you're right. This does impact states and cities to deal with workforce impacts and layoffs. So yes, so that fund does exist, and we'll certainly be getting information on that if we come to the unfortunate situation where the city had to look into that. We'll see what resources are available through that program as well.
Thank you, Francisco, and then Jen.
Imagine there will be kind of a more of a streamlined process to get funding out quicker than the usual kind of federal government packages, but any indication on what if the requests are going to be more immediate to help with this crisis?
Mayor and Councilmember Heredia, we hope so. You've probably seen the same press briefings and news reports that I have where the president has really been pushing his agencies to get this money out the door. We believe, for example, Treasury has a mandate to try to get the checks that are going out to Americans based on their income criteria out the door in 2 weeks. That would be lightning speed by federal government standards. And so we're hoping that the other agencies will follow suit. I think each agency gets the urgency, but we all know federal rulemaking and federal process takes a while. Some of these programs I know have requirements that the criteria are supposed to be set within 30 days. Hopefully, though, other portions of this, especially the formula grants, that it's just plugging in new dollars into existing formulas. Hopefully that can happen sooner rather than later.
And just to piggyback on that question, for your comments, do you know of any, what people can call? I know these checks might be something that people will reach out to, maybe us as local electeds or other information. Is there something being set up for individuals to, inquire about the information that was passed? And so just to get ready for maybe an incoming of questions and information that people want to get based on what was passed.
Great, Mayor and Councilmember Heredia, we'll look into that. I'm not sure at this point how the Treasury has set that up, but as soon as we get some information, and if they have a hotline or any website or other resources that we can point people to, we'll get that out to each of you in case you want to get it out through your social media or other communication channels. And then we'll also make sure that it's on the city COVID-19 page as well.
Thank you. Jen, did you have a question?
Yes, my question is on the COVID relief fund that we believe that we qualify for, or you said, yes, we qualify for a population number 500,000. Those funds, what do they go specifically for? Is it just for COVID relief specifically, like supplies, public safety, facilities directly affected?
Mayor and Councilmember Duff, what, I'm trying to pull up the exact language right here. So I'm not sure whether there'll be additional guidelines put out by the agency, but under the wording of the bill, it says the funds under this program can be used to cover only those costs of the state, tribal government, or unit of local government that are necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19. These must be expenses that were not accounted for in the city's underlying budget as of March 1st, 2020. So it's pretty broad. It must be new expenses. So if it was something we'd already budgeted, it's not eligible, but any of the expenses that we're incurring, for example, the extra cleaning of the parks, or what fire and medical is doing. Basically, Councilmember, our interpretation is that any expenses right now that we're incurring to respond to this would be eligible under this program.
Can I just jump in on that real quickly? Because that's a great question. And one of the things, so that council knows, that we've implemented, thank you to our finance director, we're already, all the departments that believe they have eligible expenses in responding to COVID-19 we have a special code for those, so that we're tracking those today, so that hopefully if there's a way we can get those reimbursed at some future date, we'll have the record as we're expending it today. So I just want council to know that we've already started implementing that now. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin?
Scott, can you talk about it, and hopefully you know, if not, we can chat offline. For businesses, like for example, I have a business in my district that is looking to do layoffs, and I've been working with them trying to keep their employees employed. And there's an opportunity to partner with a company in Phoenix that has a contract with the government to build ventilators, and they're interested in repurposing their facility and to keep their employees so they're not doing layoffs. So I'm kind of trying to tie the two together. I haven't had the discussion yet with the organization in Phoenix, but I know that they are looking for folks to partner with and so forth to help build ventilators and so forth under government contract. And I think from a business perspective, you know, for this company, it's easier for them just to, you know, close their facility, lay off their workers, and just kind of walk away and then ramp up when business picks back up. That's not what I'm after. I'm trying to keep people employed and keeping, you know, a semi or a quasi economy running. Is there any federal funding at all for businesses that are interested in repurposing their facility to help build ventilators or masks or anything else that is considered critical material right now to combat the coronavirus outbreak?
Mayor and Councilmember Thompson, let me look into that and I'll get back to you. We have heard examples. Councilmember Whitaker referenced locally the hand sanitizer situation. We've heard that on a larger scale in some other states where soft drink companies, you can all laugh now, soft drink companies have repurposed their lines to do hand sanitizers and other things as well. And it's gotten very quick federal approval in that regard, quicker than you would ever think the federal government would act. So there may be some programs that they're looking at, Councilmember, that incentivize or help those companies make that transition. I'll look into that and I'll get back to you.
And could you do that quickly? Because I'm trying to tie everybody together today before they have to get into layoff mode. So hopefully within the next few hours, I can try to pair the two companies together to have that discussion, because both are interested. I just don't know necessarily that one company would be willing to pay the other company to support their, to I guess, be a subcontractor for government contracts, versus just bringing people on board as a company. So I'm just trying to keep doors open, facilities running, and people employed. If there's a program in place, or if we can get a program or some dollars so that the company can pay its employees and keep their doors open and help the government at the same time, then that's kind of what I'm after. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor and Councilmember Thompson. We'll definitely look into that. We'll have our federal folks look into that too and see if they're aware of anything. But on top of that, I know that you all have gotten questions from our congressional delegation of where can they be helpful. And this is one area, Councilmember Thompson, that maybe we can engage our senators and Congressman Biggs and Stanton to see if they're aware of any programs or can help facilitate some of that as well.
Thank you. Council, other questions for Scott? Just a comment I would share. I think it's very fortunate that Mesa snuck over the 500,000 citizen point, in a couple of years ago, so that we're on I guess probably the 40 or so cities in the United States that might be eligible to participate in this. So that's a nice break for our community. I hope that, we were just talking, I hope that we're going to be very aggressive in pursuing this money in terms of grant writing, both at the federal and the state level. I know we are, but we were just talking about different scenarios where we're closing facilities for 6 or 9 or 12 months. And there are some full-time employees that are, jobs are at risk there, obviously, but there are some who are, I guess it's not clear to me what they're going to be doing with their time while those facilities are closed. If we can just be very aggressive in shifting people to having a small army of grant writers at the city of Mesa, and very aggressively pursuing every dollar that we might be eligible, both at the federal and the state level. I'm sure that goes without saying, Mr. Brady. I'm just stating the obvious, but I would love it if Mesa if people really get sick and tired of hearing about Mesa, Arizona at the state and federal level when it comes to reviewing grants. This is a record-setting amount of money, and I think we need to do all we can to be first in line at every opportunity to participate.
Sure.
Thank you. If there's nothing else on that agenda item, the next item on our agenda is item 2. That's current event summary, including meetings and conferences attended. Council, who would like to share something? Jen, we always look at you when we get to this item because you're so active. Anything to share with us?
Well, I have been active on Zoom and listening to a lot of meetings and around the virus. As far as things outside of that, I did attend was on a panel for an ASU social embeddedness conference that was done via Zoom yesterday, and talking about the heat action plan, looking at our poor neighborhoods and how they're impacted by heat, and the social embeddedness of empowering those people, those residents to be part of the process and heat alleviation and deaths in their areas. So other than that, I think all of my meetings have been around the subject of learning more or being in communication with our citizens.
Okay, thank you. David.
Yes, I had also a meeting via telephone with Chris Bliss, who's going to be taking over the Red Mountain Community College campus in terms of what we're going to do for the future. Because as you know, the community colleges are affected with the COVID virus and what's happening in and around recruitment. And so we canceled our meeting for April. We're going to be reconvening in October sometime to continue to work with our community, to educate our community, and try to bring some of the stakeholders in around the Red Mountain area in District 5. So it's affecting not only the city of Mesa, but it's certainly affecting our institutions of learning, the K-12 setting. They're having their own struggles, as well as the Mesa Community College and colleges around the city of Mesa. So, but we are working, trying to improve the lives of our citizens in Mesa Community College in and around the Mesa area.
Thank you, David. Anyone else want to? Yes, Francisco, and then Kevin. Go ahead, Francisco.
More of a comment. Unfortunately, this crisis hit when we have our, the decennial count on the census, and we had a pretty robust outreach plan hitting, this week and Census Day, April 1st. And so as everybody is working on this crisis, we also have a census count that residents are participating. So encouraging as much as possible that we can push out the census is important. I know the Census Bureau pushed out some dates that they were working on towards later in the year, so that's a good sign. Folks can fill it out online this year, so folks have already been filling out, and Mesa's about 2% above the Arizona self-response rate right now, which is a good sign, but there's pockets around West Mesa, downtown, along the 60, all across Mesa that we are seeing that we need more of a outreach there. So just FY, I know maybe Mr. Brady later on in the meetings, maybe, just in the next couple of weeks, we can emphasize ongoing census efforts that we can do on the digital side or whatever we can do online to push out the information out this time. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know I got my card. We all got our cards probably a week or so ago, and I went online. It took just a few seconds. A few minutes, but it's a good activity while you're staying at home. Mr. Thompson, Kevin.
Yeah, so good reminder, Frankie. I think it's time for all of us to do our 2020 census while we're hunkered in place. I've been trying to work with some of the businesses in the community, the larger business like down our Southeast Business group, and the good thing is most of them are considered essential businesses to the economy and to the government, so they're not impacted. Most of them said that they are practicing their social distancing. They've made some changes to how they're interacting, but for the most part, they're up and running. In fact, CMC still is actually hiring. So for those that are looking for jobs, CMC is actually hiring, and so we can get our citizens employed for those that have been laid off or let go.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to share anything? I'd just like to give another shout out to tomorrow. The United Food Bank is having a large activity at the Mesa Convention Center. They're anticipating 2,000 folks are going to show up looking for food. So get the word out. That's from 7 a.m. to noon tomorrow. Get the word out. They need obviously some volunteers. I think the National Guard might be engaged in that. So I think they'll be staffed, but there's opportunities to volunteer, but also anyone that you know who might be a low to moderate income family that is concerned about food. That's a great opportunity tomorrow at the Mesa Convention Center. Also, tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock, I'm going to be hosting a community summit online directed at the faith community and at our nonprofits. And the goal of this is to talk about what we can do to make sure we're doing the best job we can to serve and protect the seniors in our community. I think we're all concerned with the data that's been shared about the life-threatening impact on our seniors, particularly those with underlying health concerns. So I think we all need to do what we can to target those folks in our community who might not be in a social safety net through a church or a family. When I was at this food event a week or so ago, I was really disappointed to see a lot of seniors there, and seniors that were obviously experiencing health problems. So those are the folks we need to do everything we can to help them stay in their homes, and the community needs to step up and help them have that opportunity. So if you could encourage people to log on at 1 o'clock tomorrow, again, we'll be talking with the churches and nonprofits about what our community can do to make sure we're rising to the occasion of protecting the seniors in our community. Mr. Brady, I know we're going to continue on the Tuesday, Thursday study session calendar for the time being. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor. So right now, exactly, we're scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m. We'll continue using it as an opportunity to get another update briefing from your public safety chiefs. We'll have Natalie here to talk about follow up on the memo and more updates on how we're using federal funds and working with our nonprofits to deliver services to those that are impacted. So right now, that's what I have on the agenda. There may be more, but that's what we'll start with for sure on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our agenda for this meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. And Mr. Freeman has given a second to that. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that's a unanimous vote. Thank you. We are adjourned.